All right, we're here with Mr. Ben Masters today. Ben is a filmmaker, and we're so excited to talk to him today. He recently worked on a film called Deep in the Heart, which he's going to tell us more about later. So, welcome to our podcast and videocast this time, too, Ben. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. I'm from Amarillo originally, and I went to high school in San Angelo. I studied wildlife biology at Texas A&M University. Actually spent a semester down in Kingsville.
Really?
Learned a lot about fishing in Baffin Bay and not that much about class.
That's okay.
Then I kind of went through college. I took off summers and falls and managed a hunting operation kind of due east of Laredo, about 20 miles or so near Miranda City. And then did pack trips up in the mountains and in the summertime. And whenever I graduated, I kind of thought about going into research or going into land management. And then I was a part of a movie called Unbranded, where myself and a couple other friends, we adopted some wild Mustangs and rode them from Mexico to Canada. And we made a film about that. The director, Phil Baraboo, did. And I got to see kind of firsthand the power that a movie can have on people's perceptions about a particular topic. It's a great way to advocate for something. It's a great way to take people to a different place and meet people and get hit with emotions and visuals and stories. So I started doing wildlife adventure and conservation films about 9 years ago or so is whenever I started doing those myself. And I have a small film company. There's about 10 of us or so that kind of come in and out, called Fin and Fur Films. And we make probably 6 or so short films a year, and then one feature film every 2 to 3 years. And we just released Deep in the Heart, and it's the last 3 years of our lives. We gave it everything we had and are extremely proud of it. And thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to get to talk to you about the film.
Oh, well, we're excited. Yeah, we're just super excited. I saw the film in on the big screen, and it was wow. Just wow. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that project is 100% something to be proud of, because you guys really accomplished something significant there, not only from like a cinematography standpoint, but like being able to convey a story that doesn't involve people or really, as much narrative as you usually have in a film, but still to have that same impact is something something to be applauded.
Yeah, definitely. I should have introduced Andrew before we got started. Andrew Lowry is our editor, and he's going to be off camera today, but he might ask a few questions.
All right, go editors. We love you, editors.
Right.
They never get any recognition.
No, I know.
And just for fair warning, I fully expect some honest criticism of the film and how we did not put any fire stories into the stories. So,
well, we know
don't hold it against me.
It's all right. I will say I did notice that there was no fire footage, but I'm not going to criticize. It was really awesome. It's such a great film.
Well, I'd love to make a movie about prescribed burns sometime. So
do it. Let's do it.
If I can help you with that, I'd love to.
I'm trying to burn tomorrow. We're getting a bunch of equipment ready today to go tomorrow. So super excited. Yeah.
So Ben, for the listeners who haven't seen the film yet, can you kind of break down what the film is and what it's about?
Sure. So Deep in the Heart is a feature-length movie that's narrated by Matthew McConaughey. It's 100 minutes long, and it's got 12 major species and stories that are in it that range from ocelots to black bears to alligator gar to blind catfish, and it showcases some of our most amazing animals and habitats in Texas, as well as a lot of the human involvement and stories that are happening across the state. So, for example, one of the stories that we told is about how the bison across Texas were slaughtered in the late 1800s, and how one of our earliest conservationists, a lady by the name of Molly Goodnight, and her husband Charles, they saved the species from extinction, or at least the southern plain bison herds from extinction. And then over time, they've slowly grown. And, today we have our Texas state bison herd running across the prairie up at Caprock Canyon State Park. It's got a recovery story on white-tailed deer and bears, and kind of follows a lot of the hydrology of the state from our headwaters all the way out to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a love letter to Texas. And, I guess a call to action, so to speak, of some of the big challenges that we face as a state in order to, continue to have these big wild spaces that are teeming with wildlife. There's a lot of wonderful things happening, and there's a lot of big challenges that we have ahead.
Definitely.
So where did the idea for the film come from, Ben? And was this your idea, or were other people involved from the get-go, or did they kind of get in as things progressed? Like what's the production story here?
So this idea has been in my head, I think, since about 2013 or 2014. I've always just loved natural history, like the David Attenboroughs, the life on our planet, planet Earth, Blue Planet, just getting to be transported to these different parts of the world and getting to see their wildlife. That has always been something that ever since I was a little kid, I've loved. And, Texas doesn't have that, or at least it didn't have that. We've never had our own natural history wildlife movie, which I think is a shame, because Texas is, one of the most biodiverse states, and it also has all these different ecoregions. Plus we have our own unique rivers. We have tons of endemism. We got species found here that are found nowhere else. And then, from a migratory standpoint, we have some of the most spectacular migrations on Earth, really, and critical wintering ground from across the continent. So Texas is so incredibly special. And I guess over the last 10 years or so, as I've been making a lot of these short films, I've kind of gotten to be exposed to a lot of these different stories, whether it's from, the return of the desert bighorn, or some of the recovery efforts around pronghorn, or, about how people have spent decades improving their land and springs have come back to life. And in the year 2018, there was a series called Our Planet that came out, and it was a Silverback production narrated by David Attenborough. And that series, for the first time, really wove in the human relationship with the natural world in a way that has never been done before with a wildlife movie. And especially because in Texas, the impact of humankind is so great on our, wildlife and on our ecosystems, both in a positive and negative manner. That really inspired me to create Deep in the Heart, where our society's relationship with the natural world was the main character and the main through line that takes you, all the way from the late 1800s up to current day, to where at the end of the film, we kind of look ahead at some of the challenges that our state faces with, increasing population and increasing fragmentation, and, the importance that we need to place on recovering a lot of species and conserving the wild landscapes that we have.
Yeah. I love that you wove in the human dimensions of it. And I wasn't expecting that when I went to the theater. I thought it was just going to be all about the wildlife and the wild places. And so I really love that you wove that thread the whole way through. One of the things that was really amazing to me, and I grew up watching all those shows too. Total nerd about that. I'm older than you guys are. So I grew up watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. That was my nature show that took you places. I just aged myself considerably. But anyway, I've never seen footage like some of the footage that you guys got, and I've worked on those ranches where the ocelots live, where you got the ocelot footage. I know where you were, and I'm just like, how did they get in there? I mean, some of those places you can hardly crawl. You have to be ocelot sized and way more agile than I am, to crawl through those spaces. How did you get all those different angles?
So the ocelot filming, first off, got to give credit to the East Foundation for conserving, the largest population of ocelots that we have in the United States.
Mhm.
They take stewardship of their wildlife so important. It's like woven into the fabric of who they are, and that's where we filmed. And super grateful for them to, not one, conserving the ocelots, but two, having us come out and film.
Yeah.
Also, the Cesar Clayburgh Wildlife Research Institute, they've been filming ocelot, or not filming ocelots, but researching ocelots for over 30 years. And Dr. Michael Tuiz, the feline professor there, he really saw the potential that we had to film ocelots and kind of took us under his wing and spent a tremendous amount of time with me and my team teaching us about where they like to hang out, what kind of trees they like to be under, how they move from one patch of brush to the next, what we know, a lot about what we don't know. We discovered a lot of things too as we were filming them. But we went into it thinking that we would need to get about 10 to 15 different clips of ocelots to be able to tell the story. And that story would just be like, wow, look how cool this cat is. And that's all that you could really hope for, because honestly, like, what's the chances of finding kittens or a
Right? I know.
predation?
The
Like
kitten thing was
moonshot.
insane.
And we just happened to come in and get all of our camera traps figured out and get into this area where they had been researching this female cat for a few years. She was 11 years old when we started filming her, and she had a relatively small home range, and she had a few pockets of brush that she really liked to hang out in and just kind of chill in the middle of the day and hunt and kind of bed up and stuff. So we were able to put up these scouting cameras inside of there and figure out, what trails she walked down, what trees she liked to climb. And as we were doing this scouting and as we got our camera traps dialed in, she had kittens. And it was just this fortuitous, meant to be moment where we got to not only get the first quality footage of ocelot ever taken in the United States, but it was of a mom raising her kitten. And to get that look was so incredibly special. One of the greatest wildlife sequences I know that we'll ever get to film in our career. And we learned a tremendous amount about the ocelots from like a behavioral standpoint.
Mhm.
I think that's indicative of a lot of the sequences that we filmed in this is, without conservation minded land stewards, without research organizations or some scientists, we couldn't have gotten a lot of the shots that we did, because it takes so much knowledge of those particular species to be able to get in and film them. So, huge thanks to everyone involved that helped us with the research and intel on getting these images.
Yeah. That really is special. I mean, that footage of the mother and her kittens and being able to show just how tough it is for a kitten.
When she
to make
loses
it.
one.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna give it away. I wasn't gonna give it away, but yeah, one of them disappears. And I know you've
Yeah.
had people ask you if you know what happened to it, and you don't.
Yeah, we don't know what happened to the one
Yeah.
that disappeared, but the one that survived, we followed through, and she established a territory next to her mother female, next to her mother.
Yeah.
And we actually filmed them for so long that the mother that we filmed had another kitten, and
Really?
we filmed that kitten as well. And we have this cool shot where it's got mom, her 2-year-old daughter, and then like this little bitty tiny kitten together.
Wow.
So you can kind of see that,
Yeah.
that lineage there is
Uh-huh.
pretty neat.
That's really special.
and she was a wonderful for the paparazzi. Like she like enjoyed the cameras. She would just go and pee all over them, and mark on them, and hang out in front. It was very cinematic.
Yeah, I just the whole time I was watching, I'm in the theater and I'm like wanting to shout to everybody, do you know how crazy this footage is? You guys get how wild this footage is? I mean, we're just sitting there eating our popcorn and my mind is blown by this footage.
And that armadillo shot, like,
yeah,
what in the world? You couldn't have scripted that. Like, any shooter would do that and be like, yeah, no, ocelot hunting armadillo, like,
right.
What else do you want me to get? Sasquatch?
Exactly. Yeah, but it's great. I mean, I just can't praise that film enough. It was just awesome. Awesome work.
Thank you. And our team is getting better, and we're staying in this wildlife storytelling space. So
oh, you should. I mean,
we'll
have more coming out in the future.
That's great.
No, that's really awesome. We really need people making wildlife, especially wildlife science related media of any kind, whether it be audio or video, like just to get the spotlight on it. That's such an awesome thing.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of that, Ben, what made you want to be a filmmaker? Did you always kind of have the want growing up, or was there something that kind of spurred this passion for you?
No, I think, film for me is not particularly my passion as much as it is storytelling for stuff that I really care deeply about. And I care a lot about wildlife and wild habitat. And I think that really comes from growing up in a pretty rural background and spending a lot of time on ranches as a kid and seeing a lot of those wild landscapes that I grew up in as a kid, be converted into wind energy. And then, I've done 2 Mexico to Canada horseback rides, which you spend that much time on a saddle traveling through the wilderness, it's pretty impossible not to fall head over heels in love with the natural world. And for me, I think that a movie has the ability to allow people to see the world in a way that a magazine article or still photography or a science publication or a book can't convey. You can see visuals, you can hear the bird song, you can create characters, you can have information and graphs and data and really tell these stories that endear people to these animals or to the habitats that they live in. And I feel like our society is so removed from the natural world today that it's important to meet them where they're at, and that is on their screens. And it's a lot easier to show people videos of ocelots and get them to be inspired about it than it is to bring them down into ocelot brush and have them see an ocelot. So that's why I make movies, because I think it's the most powerful way to share the stories of these wild animals.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've never really heard it put that way before, that we need to meet them where they're at and they're on their screens, but definitely it's such a powerful medium. It really is. So I'm a professor here in the Range and Wildlife Department, and I've met a lot of students over the years who are studying range and wildlife, but they're more interested in what you're doing right now that is more artistic. The science is there and it's showing the science, but maybe they want to be a photographer or a filmmaker or an artist. And it's really hard to advise those kind of students about what the career steps are, because I don't even know what the career steps are, to be honest with you. And I'm not sure that the steps are as clear as they are, say, if you wanted a career with Texas Parks and Wildlife or something like that. So I'm wondering if you could give advice to people who, would like to sort of follow in your footsteps and do more of the art of wildlife science where we're, bringing it to the people. What would you tell young people?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I never got at my master's or my PhD, so it's difficult for me to put myself in the shoes of, research scientists that spend years of their life accumulating data and putting it into a journal for other people to read and to have insight off of what they discovered or did not discover. But I do think that I am the target demographic for that type of research. Like, I eat, breathe, and love reading, scientific publications and trying to see, the unraveling of these mysteries in the natural world. And some of them, even though I know the jargon, even though I studied it for 4 years, I find them difficult to stay engaged in and difficult to stay caring about because they're written in a way that doesn't really tell a story or make it matter.
Yeah.
And I think recognizing that, in science, it's also okay to have pretty pictures. And it's also okay to put into the summary of why something is important so that you can tell that story to people who want to know why your research is worth, a $100,000 grant in 3 years of somebody's life. So even if you're not going into film or into photography, I think that just having some good visualizations for different papers is important in readership and getting people to look at it. But I also think, and I'm not telling you something that is this accurate? Would you?
Oh yeah, you're being very kind with your words. It's just boring sometimes, okay? What we write and how we write it and how we communicate it. It's how we communicate with other scientists, but we generally don't communicate very well with the general public, and that's where we lack. So, yeah, you're being kind about it, but we need to do a better job at getting pretty pictures and making it a meaningful story so people will give a damn about it, really.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for everybody, but if you particularly want to specialize in the storytelling of, whether it's NGOs or research or conservation organizations, I think it's important to recognize that you want to embark on a very, very difficult career, and there is no predictable revenue streams. There is no path of career building. There's no one to hold your hand. There's no state or federal agency that is going to guarantee you a salary. There's no benefits. It is very hard and it's very competitive. And if you want to get into it, you need to commit hard because it's a saturated field. And not only does it have to be really beautiful and tell a story, but it also has to be factually accurate, because and that's something that weighs heavy on me is, we, like, for example, we're editing this ocelot film right now that's 50 minutes long that will likely be a defining piece of media for ocelots for the next 10 or 20 years. And to go into something so important as ocelot conservation kind of nilly-willy, you might get some of your facts wrong, or you might not share an opinion properly. So you need to take that storytelling job extremely seriously, and then you just need to do it. there's not going to be anybody that is going to fund your first movie. There's not going to be anyone that is going to say, oh, that's a great idea. Here's $20,000, even though you've never done this before.
Yeah.
Make a short film, borrow somebody's camera, borrow one of my cameras, borrow whatever you need, your IOUs, your social capital. There are so many wildlife stories that are out there. And if you can make a 7-minute film that has a character and something happens in it, and there's purpose behind that film, it doesn't need to be shot on a red. It doesn't need to have ocelots in it. That short film itself is going to indicate to, people like myself that you really care and you know how to make a story. And that is more powerful than a resume that has a filmmaking degree from UT or from any other university. It's just make a movie and learn, because that's what people want to see right there. And it'll be the best opportunity for you to understand how stories unfold, how editing works, the power of music. And yeah, that's my long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's a great answer. And
then after you make it, send it to me, because we're hiring.
well, that's good to know.
Okay. So Ben, recently you've been working as an advocate for a coalition called Texas for Mountain Lions, and the Deep in the Heart film introduces some issues concerning mountain lion trapping. What are the current concerns over the management of mountain lion trapping? And also, what does the Texas for Mountain Lions coalition hope to accomplish?
Sure. So let's dive into mountain lions here. This is one of my favorite topics. So before we get into the current day, let's take a look at what the mountain lion is. So mountain lions are one of our most widely, or actually it's the most widely distributed cat on Earth. And if we went back in time 200 years ago, we would have found them all over the East Coast, across the West, across North America, up into Canada a little ways until it starts getting colder, throughout Central America, throughout South America, all the way down into like the Pampas of Patagonia and Argentina. At the more extreme latitudes, these cats can get to be around 200 pounds or so. And then around the equator, as they get smaller, they're typically closer to like 90 to 110. Here in Texas, our mountain lions are, mature cats going to be between, 90 pounds for a medium-sized female, up to about 140 pounds or so for a big male. If it's got a full belly, maybe a little bit bigger. They primarily eat, they're somewhat of a generalist in the fact that they'll eat a variety of different things wherever they occur in their range. Here in Texas, they eat deer, they eat javelinas, they'll eat raccoons, they'll eat possums, they'll eat coyotes, really whatever they can get their paws on. But their primary source of prey in most of their area is deer, either mule deer in West Texas or whitetail deer in South Texas. So if you look at the history of mountain lions here in the United States, prior to the 1950s or the 1970s, mountain lions were extirpated east of the Mississippi, with the exception of a couple dozen individuals in the swamps in Florida, which became the critically endangered Florida panther, which is a mountain lion. People call them panthers. Out west, mountain lions were, drastically reduced in the 1800s, early 1900s, to where really they only survived in a lot of the, really remote canyons and mountain ranges where they were extremely difficult to trap or poison or kill off. So in the 1970s, we had a large conservation and environmental psyche sweep across the country that resulted in some really important conservation landmarks in our history, such as the Clean Air, Clean Water Act, such as the Endangered Species Act, and mountain lions in all of the states where they existed in were made into a game animal, or at least either at that point in time or over the next few decades, it became a game animal. And as a game animal, they were, managed with data by the State Wildlife Management Agency. the same way that we do, deer or elk or quail or wherever, where you've got seasons, you've got bag limits, and you've got some science-based management that ensures harvestable surplus of that animal, but also to where it has a healthy future. In the 1970s, those proposals were happening in Texas, but they didn't come to fruition, and the can was kind of kicked down the road. And then in the 1990s, there was also an effort to make the mountain lion a game animal. And by the way, making a mountain lion a game animal takes a legislative action. And I think that our legislature right now isn't really in a situation to where they would do that, nor do I think it's good for wildlife to become a political thing. I think that our state wildlife agencies are much better suited to manage that animal than to, have a lot of politicians who, quite frankly, often don't know where their water comes from.
Right.
So right now in Texas, mountain lions are a non-game animal. So they don't have any seasons, they don't have any harvest limits, and they don't have any trapping limits or trap check regulations. And what I mean by that is that there is standard trapping ethics within trapping pretty much nationwide that have a mandatory trap check regulations. So most of the time it's 36 or 48 hours. And the purpose of that is so that those animals that get trapped don't die from dehydration or exposure over the course of 5 to 10 days. It's respecting the life and death of that animal is the intention of those trap check regulations.
Right.
And mountain lions in Texas are specifically excluded from those trap check regulations. So you can lay out traps and just leave them, and then mountain lion steps in it, and it may take them multiple days or over a week to just sit there and die, which I take issue with. I hunt, come from an agricultural family. Providing a respectful death to an animal is something that we should all strive to do. So, this coalition that I'm involved in, Texans for Mountain Lions, we're encouraging Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to uphold that same 36-hour trap check for mountain lions, to recognize that there is a legitimate need for agricultural producers, for wildlife managers to target mountain lions. Like, mountain lions eat stuff, that is something, but we shouldn't just let them die over the course of days.
Sure.
And then another thing that we're asking Texas Parks and Wildlife to do is to start having some harvest reporting of those cats, so that we can see, is there 100 cats a year that are being harvested? Is there 200 cats? Is there 25? And that number will, over time, show us a trend of, how cats are doing. Because if there's 100 cats that are being harvested for the next 10 years, then that is going to indicate that, they're doing well. There is no reason for concern. But if that number plummets to like 3 or 4, and then it's verified by other additional data that the mountain lion is suffering, then that is reason for alarm. And one thing that I've definitely seen with the ocelot issue and with other issues in the United States is that it's so much better to have constant health care with wildlife animals or with different species and management policies, rather than waiting to go into the emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the time it's an emergency, by the time the numbers dip so low where you've got like the feds that want to get involved, or where it becomes super controversial, that's the worst case scenario. We should definitely manage to where that doesn't happen. And right now there's enough data that has been collected on mountain lions, and there's enough concerning trends that I think we really need to put in some safeguards to monitor the cat, and if necessary, to begin managing the cat so that it ensures, a healthy future.
So have you seen any, with your coalition, have you seen any positive movements or any movement towards positive changes for mountain lions?
Um, let me see here. Where are you at? Okay, I found you. Yeah, so we've seen a tremendous amount of support for Texans for mountain lions. As of right now, there's been 1,800 people that have signed their name to, support some of the proposals that we have. That has resulted in 14,000 emails being sent out to different policymakers. And I think that we've been successful at reaching out to a lot of different stakeholders, cattle raisers, sheep and goat, Texas Wildlife Association, a lot of these different folks that are going to be impacted by mountain lions, and let them know, like, hey, this is an issue here. We don't know how many cats there are. We don't know if the population is viable. We have no management plan. We have no safeguards. We need to be able to monitor and to manage these cats. So we came up with these proposals, which we hope are very realistic and things that different people can come around. So as we discussed earlier, we had the 36-hour trap check, and then we had the harvest reporting, so we can get some baseline data on mountain lions. Another thing is for Texas Parks and Wildlife to do a lot more research to figure out where are the cats, what is the density, what are some of these basic questions that we have are surrounding mountain lions. And then also right now with mountain lions, it's perfectly legal to go out and catch a mountain lion in a live trap, hold it, and then release it. And then, somebody, whether they know it or not, could hunt it and think that they're engaging in a legitimate hunt. So canned hunting is completely legal for mountain lions in Texas, which that is not a common thing that is happening. Like, to make that very clear, that is not common. But I have heard multiple reports of that happening. Other people have heard of multiple reports of that happening, and it's wrong. It's something that's very prevalent in Africa, canned lion hunting. That's something that's a can of worms we just don't want to have happen in Texas. It's wrong. Another thing we're suggesting to Texas Parks and Wildlife is to put together like an actual advisory group that has, livestock producers, that has farmers, that has people that are going to be impacted by lions, able to, voice their concerns over different management strategies, so that we can make some implementation, or to make some regulations and some concerns that takes all these different stakeholders in mind. And then the last thing is to manage by region. Right now we have mountain lions in West Texas, and we have mountain lions in South Texas. And if you go pretty much along the Devils River due west in West Texas, you find mountain lions. And then in South Texas, if you make a triangle from approximately Del Rio to Freer to Laredo, a lot of that, hilly, broken South Texas brush country is mountain lion habitat.
Okay.
So in West Texas, there is considerable migration of mountain lions from both Mexico, where mountain lions are protected, and also from New Mexico, where mountain lions are managed. So there's always going to be new cats coming into West Texas. So the concern of the West Texas population crashing is not, something to be extremely concerned about. The South Texas population, on the other hand, is where most of the concern is looking at, because quite frankly, we don't know if there's 25 mountain lions in South Texas or if there's 250 mountain lions in South Texas. South Texas is also undergoing a lot of habitat fragmentation, especially that country just south of Uvalde. There's a couple big ranches that are phenomenal land stewards along the Rio Grande, but there's a trend of South Texas landscapes of going from 10,000 acre pastures to 1,000 to 320. And as more and more roads come in, as more and more people are utilizing that landscape, that's going to make it more and more difficult for cats to continue to have a viable population in South Texas. So another thing, and it's something that hasn't happened right now, but something that is worth mentioning is it's very possible that with the mortality rates that have been recorded in South Texas, that the South Texas population is reliant upon cats coming out of Mexico and bringing both genetics and dispersal cats to kind of bolster our South Texas numbers. And, the previous administration was very adamant about putting up a wall or a physical structure along the US-Mexico border. And, right now between Laredo and Del Rio, where those cats are coming across, probably 20% of that country has a wall or a fence that's 12 feet high with concertina wire on top that is going to be stopping wildlife migration coming into South Texas in that stretch. So that's not a concern right now, but say that fence is completed in the next 10 years or in the next 20 years, which is certainly possible. And if we don't take the South Texas population, if we're not concerned about that population, or if we don't have any baseline data for that population, we could find ourselves in a situation where all of a sudden, we don't have enough cats for them to stay viable. And right now we're extremely vulnerable to that because we don't have harvest reporting. We don't have the information that's necessary to have any safeguards to ensure their future. And to me, I just find that incredibly irresponsible, and something that needs to change. And that's why, I put my name on the coalition. I've spent many years of my life outside of Laredo, guiding deer hunts, guiding quail hunts, and then, tons of time setting up camera traps across South Texas. For probably 8 years of my life, I've had camera traps running in South Texas, and I have never gotten a mountain lion on camera trap. And you can't tell me that I don't know how to camera trap. And that same sentiment, or that same lack of seeing cats, has been seen by a variety of people. Some friends that I have in Dilley haven't seen one. Some friends that I have, down by closer to Raymondville have been running cameras. They haven't seen any. In other areas, you have conflicting reports. Like I've got a buddy in Eagle Pass who manages a big ranch, and he's seen more mountain lions over the past 10 years than, or he thinks they're doing extremely well, and they have more now than they did historically, but nobody knows.
Right.
And that's what our coalition is requesting Texas Parks and Wildlife to do is, let's start monitoring these cats. Let's start doing some research on these cats. Let's do harvest reporting. Let's ban canned hunts. Those things are things that should be done. And then let's put these safeguards in place so that we never get to a situation where we do have to, not have trapping or not have any hunting. It's so much better to be proactive about wildlife management than reactive whenever that population crashes, or if that population crashes.
Yeah. No, I love that because you just hit the nail on the head right there at the end. So often we're coming in at the tail end trying to save a population, and that just doesn't always work. It usually doesn't work. It's, really difficult. So let's be proactive. I love that you're taking up this cause and bringing it to the public so that the people understand what's going on. I just want to go back to something. There might be people watching or listening who aren't hunters, and they might be confused about, you've guided hunts, you're a pro hunter. We're not saying anything, we're not saying that hunting is bad, but canned hunting is different. Could you tell folks how canned hunting is different and how it's, not exactly a sporting thing to do? Could you just, spend a few minutes on that?
Yeah, I can. And we're kind of getting into some gray area of ethics and what some people believe is ethical and what some people believe is unethical. And everybody is different. There's some people that take issues with feeding corn for deer to attract them in
Mhm.
Personally, I like to have deer 75 yards away and broadside whenever I pull the trigger so that I can ensure a clean kill. And I use corn to get them there. So, everybody's different in how they perceive different ethics, but for the most part, pretty much everybody in the hunting community would condemn and say that it is unethical to capture a live mountain lion from the wild, keep it in a trap, and then if you had a hunter who wanted to go on a mountain lion hunt who would assume that they are hunting a wild mountain lion, to purchase that hunt, come out, run dogs, and then when the mountain lion goes up the tree, they get shot. And the hunter assumes that it's a wild cat, but has been duped because it's a canned hunt. And that's that's wrong. And I'm not saying that happens all the time. It's very rare, but it's perfectly legal to do that right now. And it's also, in my opinion, wrong if that hunter knowingly went out and ran dogs and hunted a cat that he knew came from a cage. So I think that that's something that, again, it's not common, but money talks. And sometimes these mountain lion hunts where legitimate hunters are going out and expecting a fair chase hunt, they're going to pay like $10,000 to $15,000 for a good hunt.
Sure.
And that's a big incentive for somebody to possibly go into that ethical spot of hard times came across them, they could potentially capture a live cat and secure that hunt. And it's not illegal. And that to me is one of the things that it's bothersome is, our laws theoretically should be a reflection of the ethics that, we have. And as a hunter that hunts in Texas and in Colorado and New Mexico and Montana and has, been across the globe, whenever you look at a state's policies for hunting, you make the assumption that if you're there and hunting that animal, that it is a sustainable population. And that's not the case in Texas right now. We have absolutely no idea if our current mountain lion population in South Texas is sustainable or not. And I feel like hunters are almost kind of let down right now because, the regulation is open season, regardless of the fact that all the research that has been conducted has shown, alarmingly high mortality rates. And, the Texas Parks and Wildlife considers I think an S2 vulnerable animal. So they recognize they're not super abundant. And I just think sometimes about how big of a shame it would be if in South Texas, we just got to one year to where mountain lions weren't being seen, and then slowly over time they're just gone. Like, what a shame that would be. And to knowingly allow that to happen, I think is just best prevented.
Definitely. So in the movie, in the Deep in the Heart film, is that where I saw that one reason why we don't have we have no baseline data, we don't know how many cats there are in Texas or the densities in different places. Was it in the film where I saw that of a study that was ongoing, all of them except one were killed during the study? So you can't get an idea of, how are they reproducing or what?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. There has been a tremendous amount of research that has been conducted in Texas on mountain lions.
Okay.
And whenever I say we don't know how many there are in Texas, that is accurate, but that does not mean that there hasn't been a tremendous effort and years worth of research that has gone into mountain lions. In the 1990s, whenever there was an effort to make mountain lions a game animal in Texas, there was this observation that we didn't have data. And at that time, we did not have data. So at Texas Parks and Wildlife, different organizations put together these extremely robust research projects to analyze the ecology and mortality and survival of mountain lions, both in West Texas and in South Texas. In West Texas, they did that study on Big Bend Ranch State Park.
Okay.
And in that study, I think it lasted like 4 or 5 years. They were able to they collared 16 cats in that particular study. Of those 16 cats, 15 of them walked outside of the state park lines and were captured in a leg hold trap, and most likely, took several days to die under the sun.
Mhm.
And then the last cat, it actually approached somebody on one of the put in canoe spots down there on the river, and he saw it and it was acting weird, so he shot it, which is completely understandable.
Sure.
So yeah, you had 100% human induced mortality out of that particular study. Another study in the Davis Mountains that went from 2012 up to 2020, they had, I think, 25 cats that were collared. Then they experienced a nearly 50% mortality rate for those cats, 50% annual mortality rate. So, each year they had half a chance of making it through that next year. Again, all the mortality was due to the leg hold traps.
Mhm.
In South Texas, they did a study, and what they found there was the primary cause of mortality was hunter opportunity in the fall. Somebody's sitting in a deer
Yeah.
blind, and they see a mountain lion walk out, and I mean, what an opportunity that is to harvest this beautiful cat. So like, I completely understand that sentiment. And, there was also some cats that died from snares in South Texas. It's a lot of times underneath high fences, you'll see snares on some of the game trails, as well as some of the goat fences. So those were the two reasons of mortality there. So there is fairly robust data of different populations in Texas, but there's still a lot of unknowns. And had we done harvest reporting beginning in the 90s up to current day, we would have a much better understanding of the distribution of mountain lions in Texas. We would have a much better understanding of the health of the population, and we wouldn't have all of these question marks that we have right now. And, as you look at the projections of this state, and we're seeing, the population of humans go from 30 million to 50 million people, and the demands on landscapes and on water increasing, and our land prices just skyrocketing to where it's more and more difficult for these ranches to stay intact. And we're seeing just the slow subdivision of our landscapes. The guarantee that these cats are just going to continue to exist 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, I think it's incredibly irresponsible to just assume that's going to happen, especially with the data that we have collected right now that is indicating, very serious concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for leading the charge on that. And I hope that we'll be able to come back to you in the future so you can update us on developments as that story develops, because I do hope that story develops into some positive change for the state. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And, one of the things about predator management is it's always controversial and it's always polarizing. And the people that are most impacted by large carnivores often live furthest away from the cities in which those decisions are made. And, our coalition recognizes that, and feel free to reach out to us. And, the website has a lot of resources on it. And, hopefully the proposals that we're suggesting are realistic steps that a lot of people can get behind. So this doesn't have to become like a ugly, controversial issue. And it's one that we can be proactive about rather than reactive.
Yeah. So the website is Texans for Mountain Lions. If people are interested in learning more, is that right?
Yeah, Texans for Mountain Lions. Come on, see what our proposals are. Would love to have you sign your name in support of these proposals. And Texas Parks and Wildlife is listening to the proposals as well as the commissioner. So
Good.
fingers crossed, it's going to lead somewhere.
That's good. So let's change the subject to something a little lighter. Okay. We have a favorite question that we like to ask folks about a biology blunder. And I can only imagine trying to get this type of footage and do the work that you've been doing in the past few years that you might have had a blunder or two over the years. So I'm wondering if you could share a fun story with us.
Yeah. Oh man, I could write a whole book about this. So I am a very terrestrial animal. Water is scary to me.
Okay.
Salt water is very scary because it's salty and the ocean is huge. So, I don't mind doing these small dives close to shoreline where there's like perfect visibility. And if you get in a bind, you can just swim over to the shore and it's no big deal. But whenever we were putting together our deep in the heart wish list of sequences to shoot, we had on there Texas's Coral Reef, the Flower Gardens Coral Reef, which is about 100 miles off the coast, just kind of straight due south to Galveston. And the way to reach it is you book a spot on the Giggling Marlin, which is the boat out of Houston, and they take out, 10, 15, 20 folks at a time. You motor out there to the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. It's a marine sanctuary that we have. And they anchor up and you drop in, and it is just this Caribbean blue, 70-foot visibility, beautiful coral reef right offshore in Texas.
Wow.
And I stuck my head underwater and was just like, oh my God, my family in Amarillo is not going to believe me that this is Texas.
Yeah.
It is so cool. And I'm not a super experienced diver, but my diving partner was not nearly as experienced as I was. His name is Jay Clayburg. He was the producer of the film. So whenever we went out to film the coral spawn, it happens on the 8th day after the full moon in August, right after sunset.
Wow. That's super specific.
It's super specific. You know what's going to happen. It's just the way that the reef has evolved to maximize its reproductive chances. And they just have this huge spawning event where everything spawns and it just overwhelms the predators. And that's just how that reef ecosystem works.
Very cool.
So we knew when this spawn was going to happen. And we got on the boat, we go out there, it gets dark. And we dive off, and we're just out there in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with these little headlamps dropping down to 80 feet. And we get to these big, beautiful coral reefs. And we look down, and there is just this amazing, it looked like a snowstorm where you just see these little tiny little packages, these little white balls of eggs that the coral reef has released, and they're going to float across the Gulf and try to find a substrate and make a new coral somewhere else. And we're just like floating through this fairy tale land of this coral spawn snowstorm. And I get down and I find the perfect brain coral, and I, let all my air out of the BCD. So I'm plunked down on the ground like a rock. And I've got this 100mm macro, and I'm trying to film in slow motion the actual little reproductive package coming out of the polyp and being released into the water. So I'm sitting there, and this is, very fine-tuned focusing, and my light starts flickering around. And I'm like, what in the world? And I look up at my dive partner, who's supposed to be holding the big light above me, and there is a shark that is circling him.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And we're talking like a 12-foot sandbar shark, a big shark. At nighttime, two divers who have no experience diving in the middle of the ocean.
Oh yeah.
At nighttime, not professional underwater cameramen.
Oh my God.
And this is a very special moment of the coral spawn because it only happens for like an hour. And I'm looking at the shark, and then I'm like analyzing in my head, like, what is the risk of losing the shot opportunity versus what is the risk of losing my dive partner to the shark? And it dawned on me, like, nobody's died from sharks in like Texas history. So he really needs to stop messing around and like bring my light over. So put some air in my BCD. I float up like 15 feet, and Jay's just, spinning left and right, trying to look for this shark in the dark. And I went up and I put my goggles next to him, and it's like, pointed him back down, and his eyes were just like, oh my God, what have I gotten into? We go, and we sit down on a coral reef, and he shined the light. I got our shots. Probably had 10 minutes of good filming before we both ran out of air, went up to the surface, got out, and we got it. We got everything that we needed, but our shooting was very skimpy. We used every single good shot from the coral spawn in that sequence. Yeah, and it almost got spoiled by that big sandbar shark.
Wow.
But yeah, so we got up, we changed tanks, went back down, and it was gone. Like the spawn was finished. So we hit our moment, got super lucky, and were able to get enough for that sequence. And it's not shot perfectly, but who cares? It's the first time anybody's ever seen coral spawn in Texas.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, you don't see that. You don't see that one coming when you sit down to watch a Texas wildlife movie.
No, you don't. Wow. Yeah, I would have totally freaked out. I'm comfortable in water, probably more comfortable in water than on land because there's nothing to trip over. but at night, that's a whole different story. And then you add in the one thing that you're thinking about is really there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
like it doesn't matter. Like the statistics of being bitten by a shark are so astronomically low. There is nothing to be worried about. But on the flip side of that, whenever you're down there in the water and there's a shark, you're like, oh my God, there hasn't been a shark kill in human history. Like, I'm obviously going to be the first.
Yeah. Statistics really don't matter if that guy really is circling around you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's a great story. That is a great story.
Yeah. If you ever meet Jay, you gotta ask him about it. It was a wild moment.
I will. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners or viewers?
I just want to say thanks for having me on. I think you guys are doing wonderful things with this podcast and allowing these conversations in a really, conversational mode about really important topics that are happening in Texas. Like I've just listened to the one with John Tomachek on pigs.
Such a great job, right?
Oh yeah. It's just so insightful to people that want to learn about this type of stuff. So yeah, keep up the great work, and thanks for having me on.
Very kind of you to say so. We appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. I guess we'll see you soon, hopefully, and hopefully see your next project soon as well.
Yeah, we're working on one. We'll have an ocelot movie out this fall, a full 50-minute film just dedicated to the ocelot.
Wow. Okay. Super excited. We're looking forward to that. Well, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Have a great day.
Bye, man. You too. Talk on the Wild Side is a production of the Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute of Texas A&M University, Kingsville. Funding for this project is provided by the Harvey Wild Sportsman Conservationist Award by the Rotary Club of Corpus Christi. Editing was completed by the talented Gabby Olivas, Andrew Lowry, and Trey Kendall. We thank the TAMAC Distance Learning Lab for all their help and cooperation.